This is a morning prayer reflection on Thursday, and the date is June 25th. I want to talk about the lessons from Joseph from the pit to the palace. Today's psalm was 105, and my attention went immediately to verse 17 till verse 22. It talks about the journey of Joseph, and which is found in Genesis chapter 37. Joseph's story is one of the most popular in the Bible. He was the favorite son of his father, and he belonged to his father's favorite wife, Rachel. So my favorite part of the story begins with Joseph receiving a beautiful colored coat, which drew intense feelings of jealousy from his brothers. Well, family dysfunction? Check. If there were to be a headline for them, it would have been From Pit to the Palace. And this was unexpected for me. Verse 18 of Psalm chapter 105 says, His neck they put in an iron collar. So that was the departing picture of a slave. His life prior to that was very ordinary and unique, just like any of us. But there is so much to learn from this young man. From a very young age, Joseph loved God and his family. He obeyed his parents, and he faced some siblings' rivalry. So when things turned to worse, he overcame the challenges one by one. When he shared his dreams, where he was ahead of his brothers, so he was very criticized by everyone. So he didn't give up. God has a dream and a purpose for each one of us. We should make loving God a life adventure, because God has a vision for each one of us. So Joseph continued to love God and his family despite the adversities he encountered. He always did his best in all the responsibilities that he had. As a young man, when temptation was at the door, knocking, he prevailed. So he kept at bay all the advances of Potiphar's wife, which resulted in false accusations and landed him in prison. This is a difficult one. Leaning on God in our darkest hour. How do we do it when we are not in our best shape? How do we lean on God in those moments of anger, outbursts, and outrage? How do we act? But Joseph was innocent here, and no one believed in him. I suppose deep down, he never lost his faith that God was not finished with him. Joseph's story teaches me that God's timing and plans are different from ours, but they are always the best. Joseph ultimately wanted to get out of prison. That was his plan. It probably consumed all his energy. You can imagine you're in prison, you figuring out, what can I do? Maybe should I take out all the wall here and get out? Thinking of ways. I can imagine me being in his skin. What would I do? So when Pharaoh's servants were sent to prison, they had strange dreams. So since Joseph had a divine gift to interpret dreams, Joseph told them the meaning of their dreams. Now, since Joseph was desperate to get out of prison, so he asked one of Pharaoh's servants to tell him, when you get into the palace back, when you get asked by Pharaoh to go back to your service, and please remember me, so that tell him how innocent I am. I don't belong here into prison. I need to be out of prison. So it happened. He did get out of prison. But unfortunately, he forgot all about Joseph and the story you find in Genesis chapter 40, verse 1 to 23. So this teaches us to have faith in God no matter what. We shouldn't seek relief or redemption outside God. It doesn't work. Joseph tried and stayed a few more years in prison. Our plans are likely to fall, but surely God's plans for us never miss their deadline. I am where I am now because ultimately God willed it. Now, I may have made some bad judgments along the way, wrong turns, but from where one is at the moment, God is always willing to begin with us a new journey. Where you find yourself right now, God is willing to begin a new journey with us. We need to constantly bring our plans and thoughts to God and ask for His will to be done. Involve God in your life. Pray about things. You have a plan, you have a trip, pray about it. Bring your family on the table. Let's put our plans before God. And if suffering is part of that path along the way, don't be shocked. Please know that God has not abandoned you. Maybe sometimes we need to hit rock bottom so that we can get a different perspective. Facing up. If we are on the ground, we're facing up. And then at the times when we are standing, we are facing horizontally, maybe sometimes with pride. So if you are standing, beware, because falling can happen unexpectedly. So we need to grow in discernment and wisdom. Pharaoh eventually did realize that in Joseph there was a spirit of wisdom, of course. Eventually he did remember that Joseph is the one who can interpret the dreams, and so he tells the Pharaoh about it. The Pharaoh had a dream, and Joseph was brought out of prison, and he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, and then eventually he realized, wow, you are very wise. I don't know if he knew about IQ, but he probably understood, yes, this is from God. He recognized that in Joseph there is an activity of God's wisdom. And then, yes, out of prison by God's will and perfect timing, Joseph was not bitter or revengeful, especially when his brothers came from Israel to seek food for their starving families. So he reconciled. He wanted to reconcile. His heart had mellowed over all those years. He had reached the palace finally and was in authority. He could have harmed them in the same way they did by selling him to slave traders. Deep down, he finally realized the purpose that was behind the dream, the sufferings, and the rise to high state power in Egypt. It was safe to say that his family was finally safe because Joseph now was the prime minister of Egypt, a superpower at the time. And in the process, he started saving not only a huge families, many families of Israelite descent, and also Egypt in the process. Now you are alive, thank God, because you are a special vessel for God to use. Joseph became a very important vessel God used. His journey was far from a pleasant one. You can understand. Prisons and accusations and all kinds of things, and being a slave and being hit and all kinds. But in the end, we saw God's grace and God's purposes and God's love all over this story. God's redemption. Observe God in your own story. Amen.